everyone. Welcome back to the Wrestling Prep Podcast. We are on episode 10, so we've hit double digits at this point. We're here with Coach Carolyn Wester and Andrew Morgan. And Carolyn, I know you recently made a trip down to Tulsa, a big wrestling tournament there every year, and had some athletes with you there. But seeing those matches, I know naturally sort of progresses to thinking about long term with most of those athletes are very young, and so what their career looks like and managing their career. So I know we were talking earlier, you had some thoughts about both the tournament itself and performances there with some of your athletes, but also bigger picture things related to what an athlete's career looks like, and so
Certainly.
tell us
You
about your
know,
trip.
sure. Yeah, I've been to Tulsa many times for the kickoff and for Tulsa Nationals. And this year we had a wide variety of athletes go with us. We had 5 in total that have been working with consistently over a set period of time. And each set of them who have different dynamics had a great deal of success. And the one that had the most success wasn't in terms of placing as opposed to gains in performance at a competition. And it just made me think about parents, coaches, and how you raise a young athlete in sports. Drew was a little different. He had done some sports previously that were not related to wrestling. And when he started, he just immersed himself and moved forward. And his parents weren't super active, I'd say, in like the day-to-day management of his career, but they were very supportive about getting him to a series of coaches that were competent based on the location and on their skill set. And so I was an ancillary coach for Drew. I was probably his primary competition coach outside of his middle school or high school season, but I was ancillary, and Drew would come to me. It was about a 4.5, 5 hour drive, and he would come every occasion he could, holiday weekends, summer camps, or if I was doing a clinic somewhere, travel, we did those kinds of things. But his parents were very astute in making sure he interacted with a group of coaches in his area, and if he needed a specialty coach. But most importantly, I believe Mrs. Morgan was extremely adept at letting all the coaches know that all of these coaches were important to Drew's career, and that under any circumstances, they did not expect conflict. And I never had a bit of conflict with any of Drew's coaches all the way through college and through both his RTCs. And I noticed that wasn't necessarily the case in Tulsa. But when I thought about the 3 athletes that all won their division and their weight, one got OW, there was some very common threads in these 3 athletes. And then there was a lot of diversity, different differences in these 3 athletes. And I wanted to think about what the common denominators were, and how I thought, that benefited them. And then what were some of the characteristics of each of the athletes that maybe weren't as present to such a high level in the other ones, but still made a big difference. And I think the overall number one component I noticed was there was an adult involved who was a member of the family, who served as a high, not overreaching project manager for each of these athletes. That there was a person related to them who insisted that they get the training that they wanted and how they wanted to get it without any conflict between any of the coaches involved with their athletes, and how very important I think that is. That over time, what I've noticed, the one-stop shop coaching scenario where there's a coach involved with a young athlete who insists that they compete all the time, and who insists that they don't see anybody but them, and their first response to any sort of inquiry or suggestion that another coach participate with those athletes, that they immediately attack the opposing coach, and how often parents can be intimidated for fear of losing out on the expertise of the coach that's doing the attacking. But in actuality, that's probably a sign. And really, over time, those relationships usually break because it's impossible to carry that through. Would you agree with that, Drew?
I agree completely. I think it's especially important at a younger age. And I think it kind of ties into this concept I read in this book called Range by David Epstein, an author. And it's kind of the pushback in the idea of like the 10,000 hour rule. For those who have heard, like the idea that
Mhm.
to master any craft, if you put 10,000 hours in, you're going to be a master. But he kind of breaks it down as like that's only really applicable to um, say sports action, whatever, a skill that is easily repeatable and you receive immediate feedback on. So his example was like golf. So Tiger
Mhm.
Woods, the 10,000 hour really applied to him and stuff because he started from that young age and he's hitting a golf swing, which is, you do the same exact movement every time and you get immediate feedback on where the ball goes, what you need to change. Yeah, there's coaching, but it's pretty just putting in the time, you're gonna get much better at golf. Whereas he used the example of Roger Federer, where Federer, one of the greatest tennis players of all time, arguably the greatest. He didn't start concentrating on tennis till he was 15, and his mom was a tennis coach, all this stuff. But he just hated the act of returning balls, doing the practice. He liked just playing, but he did every sport under the sun. I think he wrestled even. He did all this stuff up until 15. And then he specialized and realized he was good, and went on to do great things. And I think it's just that this idea of getting a larger range of experiences, especially at a younger age, is actually going to build you up greater, especially in an athletic context. I think, and that applies to coaching. Whereas, yeah, maybe you focus on wrestling, but trying to get as many inputs from different coaches. And then, like Carolyn said, having a project manager-esque person that can narrow down which of those coaches are the best. Because obviously, you don't want 20 coaches. That's too much. You're never going to get anything. But three, four, obviously, area dependent stuff. That's where I think, especially now, you can see kids making these big gains, like she said, and especially from this youth level, as people are starting to realize that instead of, like she said, this cookie cutter one coach for your whole career. Um, yeah, maybe initially you'll see greater success because you'll master certain moves at a younger age, which you obviously will get ahead. But as time goes on and kids catch up, maturity, strength, everything, you're gonna diminish and even burnout a lot of the time, I would say.
Well, I think too is that what you're talking about to, today and or for a long time in wrestling, or when I first started in wrestling, the philosophy was the amount of time the athlete puts in is congruent to their success.
Yes.
And it was you have to do it harder, you have to be stronger, and there wasn't any emphasis on the organic growth and change in the sport. But now it's growing so rapidly. Just recently, Rob Cole from UNC had answered an email to a coach who asked an inquiry about how to train your athletes to best learn and be able to learn. And he inserted my name as someone to use and copied me on the email because what he knows and what I know and what I hear people saying to me, especially in the combat sports, is that the movement, the body leveraging movement, the exact use of muscle, sequential order is affecting wrestling now at every level. Years and years ago, we would watch and we occasionally remember one time Jaden Cox wide legged and someone else. I mean, I didn't teach Jaden Cox that, but we would see the great athletes in wrestling doing what we were enabling people to do from the very beginning, from 5 years of age and up. But now it's prevalent. Everybody, even Captain America this week, is sending me video from Brazil of this world champion wrestler. And he said, I just started doing this. And he's like, yeah, Carolyn's been doing that for a little bit, I think. But what I want to go back to saying about these kids is the common denominator with all the three athletes that won was that their parents felt and their ancillary coach in one of their cases felt that learning to use their body correctly was essential, imperative to what they were doing. And I encouraged all of those project manager parent to never fully turn their athlete over to another person without the use of their own discernment. So there were three different people, one from Missouri, one from Florida, and one from New Jersey. And the young man from Missouri, which I can just say, Jacob Saunders, I feel comfortable, since I have worked with Jacob. I started working with Joshua the year Jacob was born. So I don't think many people do not would find it odd that Jacob is associated with wrestling prep. When Nolan discusses the body leveraging and what he wants Jacob to do, he says Jacob's entire wrestling is built on body leveraging, sequential muscle order, and Carolyn will always be a part of his career. He feels comfortable saying that because we successfully did that with Joshua. I integrated beautifully with Cornell Robinson, who's now the head coach of Wyoming Seminary. He and I've never had a bad word. We can both say, I think this, or I think this, and they can be in conflict, and we'll let the athlete try them both, and what works, works. And that has been super successful. The athlete that's from Florida, his coach, who Drew and I are both well acquainted with, his middle school coach, he sought me out to work with him because he felt that there was basic improvements needed in how he used his body, and he didn't want him to learn any more technique until he could do that correctly. And in that young man's case, his dad is the project manager, but the dad has a good relationship with the coach. But the coach can have one opinion, the dad can have another, and they agree to compromise just depending on the situation. And so that athlete, who's been extremely successful, but as his ancillary coach is noticing that a lot of the technique he's using to win isn't technique that is applicable when he's in high school and college. He cannot be dependent just on that technique, that it is technique characteristic of youth wrestling, and oftentimes maybe a stronger, more quickly to mature athlete has advantage in that technique. And then when they all are equal, all testosterone levels are equal, it doesn't work that well. And the third is from New Jersey, and they rarely compete. I think this young man who got OW in his division, this was his 5th tournament of his entire career. And his dad is also a coach, but his dad is the main project manager, and he works with me and some other really credible people and have them work with his athletes. He's got a mess of boys. He has us work with his athletes, but he's making the decision. So right before Tulsa, the week before, I was in New Jersey. And when I came in, I said, okay, coach, what's the plan? He's like, this is the plan every day. You're going to do this much, then I'm going to do this, then I want your collaborative input on what you see in the technique we're drilling, because it's a week before a tournament. We're not going to change things up, but anything we could do to make it better. And I think my opinion is that his athletes are less likely to become naturally obsessed with winning because they don't compete that often. And if they don't do well, I think the project manager, dad coach is quick to tell them why, but he's not losing his cool. He's not, there's no anger radiating off this person. And each of them are very different. And I think the fact that they are actively looking for and seeking integration into what they see in the sport, makes a big difference, and that all the coaches involved, are not, there's no tension, there's no animosity, there's no anything else. And at Tulsa, one of the athletes I'd never met, I didn't even really know personally who the other coaches were, but I met one of them and I'm like, hey, I introduced myself. Afterwards, the athlete had a lot of success. I said, thank you, coach, for, helping. And he's like, thank you, coach, for helping. And we both went our way, right? That none of us posted, wrestling prep trained or blah, blah, blah trained or whatever. And the young kids want you to post their stuff. And they ask you to come take your picture with them and do stuff with them. They ask you to tag them. But these people who just have this obsessive claiming are the people that I believe are causing a lot of conflict for the multiple athletes they're working with. What do you think,
I
Drew?
could definitely see,
Oh,
as Drew was saying earlier, about if as a young wrestler latching onto a one coach that has every one of us has sort of a certain set of techniques we do well and like to teach, especially if that kid is mature for his age, it might or her age might experience a lot of success by learning a few basic things well and having the maturity to beat up on kids that are a little less mature and at the same weight. But eventually, as you said, Carolyn, it all comes back to when everybody catches up. It comes back to how well you can use your body and how well you can move. And I wonder, it does seem in our sport that a lot of coaches have a lot of ego about they're very possessive about their athletes and making sure that everyone knows that their athletes were trained by them and they take a little bit of credit. But it sounds like you're saying in the most successful situations, there's a small group of coaches that don't have that sort of ego, almost as if the coaches are as eager to learn more as the athlete is when they get a chance
I
to
think
to observe training from other coaches and things like that too.
I think what I'm saying is that one coach who may have appear to have an ego, but I want to throw out there that I think a lot of coaches are underpaid,
Hmm.
underappreciated. They're taking their time and their money. I could see why it would matter to them,
Right,
but
right, yeah.
I think the days of doing that are limited now because now we've got these athletes growing up with online knowledge, with more diverse coaches, with parents who can help project manage,
Okay.
and that the sport has changed so very much. When you look back at film, when Jason Welch was in college and he would be executing what he and I coined scramble by design, they would say, that's freaky. Nobody can do that. That's funk. That's not teachable. And now on any given week, I can pull video of athletes. So they send it to me. Look, I knee ran through. Look, I
Mhm.
wide leg shot. Look, I second story pivoted. And they don't even recognize that, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, what they're doing that they learned from the first time they started working with us was that is what's happening. The sport is changing. And for years, people have wrapped their heads around trying to do gymnastics for wrestling, big, heavy strength and conditioning. And now with the NCAA changing and the number of available D1 scholarships, programs are probably going to be reduced. The need for good academics is going to become even
Mhm.
more. So the whole playing field has changed. And this is where I think the really good project managing parents get is that the body leveraging
Mhm.
is actual correlates to all the technique, that it is strength and conditioning. There's no doubt of the athletes I've worked with who are stronger and bigger than other athletes who've never lifted. And then on top of it, so when you have something that you can do in the first 20, 15 minutes of practice, if you know how to do it well, and then that takes up for 2 hours of running in a circle to try
Yeah.
to make weight. And it also correlates to the specific muscle order for whatever technique is being taught, whether it's the technique that I think works the best against the best math-based opposition an opponent could have or not. That's what's happening, and people aren't keeping up with. I did have a coach tell me, two coaches told me something recently. One told me that he was looking at me and I was coaching. Oh, it was Cornell Robinson at Wyoming Seminary. And I was asking the athletes to do body leveraging and then the related technique with different lead legs. And one of them was, sharing, feeling a little petulant, sharing that they didn't like that. And Cornell said Cale Sanderson recently told him that he only recruits people now who could shoot off both legs, who could switch leads. And then on top of that, I heard another college coach, I was called and told that someone made an inquiry with a well-known college coach. But since he didn't tell me directly, I don't want to use his name, but he said Carolyn may not be, actively coaching or around, but sometime in the next 10 to 20 years, the way the math-based wrestling is going to be the norm. So your choice is to learn it from her now or try to prepare to defend against it because it's coming. It's coming. And you see so many people doing it. So we wrap that all back up to youth and trying to work with kids to give them the utmost chance is where I see this, coming back to. What do you think, Drew?
Yeah, that's where I got a little bit of what Bryce was saying too, with that, like kind of it really is the ego part of it, in the sense of as that project manager, I think parents are starting to realize, or these higher level coaches are starting to realize that everyone puts in the same amount of time, especially like at the D1 level or high level high school. Everyone trains the same amount of time for the most part. Like there's now more hours in the day. You're not making up this grand amount of time. It's making that time count. And I think that's where this project manager-esque style almost is so important, because it's going, where can I be the most efficient with the time I'm going to spend? And that's where people are starting to realize, especially with, more math-based body leveraging and things like that. This is the most efficient where I get to apply, my wrestling, where it's the most, I guess, efficient as well in my movements. And like Carolyn says, it applies to all the techniques. So it's just, why waste my time doing all this other stuff that's not going to yield the biggest result? And I think that's what these project managers are starting to see. And that's where it ties in kind of to what you were saying, Bryce, of these coaches now are starting to realize that if I can just remove the ego and let other people's input, we're going to solve the problems faster.
Yes. And that the coach's self-image can't be tied to what the athletes are doing.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I realize some have, economic constraints, and so they need that success, so they feel that needs success, but they just need to reassess how they're driving revenue to their homes. Maybe if there's an additional source they can access besides just wrestling that gives them the clarity of mind. Back in the venture capital days, a big piece of advice I got was when you're working on a startup or and you're analyzing the amount of money that's already been put into a venture is to try to make decisions as if the company is already fully funded. Don't make your business plan predicated on how much money you're going to get when. Set the business plan and then make what all the decisions would be if you were fully funded, and then raise the money, but don't compromise. And I think that is a part of what, sort of needs to happen. And I think that parents, project managers getting stronger in sharing their expectations with coaches that they want and would enjoy and frankly expect collaboration between whatever sources. If you as a coach feel like you don't want to collaborate or you don't want to be associated with or a part of a team of people working with the athlete based on one of the variables in that, in that situation, then you have the right to pull yourself out.
Yeah.
But trying to damage what an athlete feels about one of their other coaches, or damage that or speak poorly of someone, is not advantageous. I mean, there may come a time where you need to share something, but usually that time comes when something has occurred
Yeah.
and the project manager is asking for input.
Exactly. And that's where I think too, it's just kind of doing what's best always by the athlete. I think that's kind of like, that needs to be your North Star always at the end of the day. It's what you're trying to do for the athlete and kind of their success. Um, and also kind of understanding too, sometimes they may just not be ready to hear it yet, and that's okay. And
It is
whether
okay.
that's the project manager, whether that's the kid, whether, especially if you're dealing with these like middle school age kids, it's sometimes, you just gotta keep it to your vest until they ask and they're open to hear this opinion. Then, like you said, you can share whether it's, something they maybe don't want to hear or it's just counterintuitive to what they've been doing. You just got to sometimes wait. And that's part of just the kind of coaching journey, uh, especially at those younger ages. They're going to go through the valleys of success and lulls, and especially when they're maturing and growing, changing weights and everything. Like it's an up and down journey. You're never going to be at the top the whole time.
It's
And
interesting,
I liked,
well, I was going to
oh,
say, it's interesting because I see now that if we can set, one of the things I really am impressed with the New Jersey example is that he is not, feels no pressure to compete. And
mhm,
he is, out of all of those project managers, the most successful previous wrestler. He was an NCAA D1 runner-up with at a school where he got a top education. There's only been four NCAA finalists from where he went to school because of the degree of intensity of,
Hmm.
of the education. The fact that he doesn't put stock in that is really important. And I think there are a lot of people who they want their kid to compete because they want them to win, so they feel good about the work they've been putting in.
Hmm.
That's the philosophy. Some, subconsciously want to be able to post, we went to this tournament and these great things happened, and they want to post that. And some just believe that's the way it has to be done in wrestling
Yeah.
because they are not comfortable inquiring with people who might be able to give them a credible answer based on experience. They just ask the person sitting next to them in the gear line or the braided hairline or whatever all those gimmicks are people do at tournaments, spend their money on. And they say, oh yeah, my kid, this, you got to go here, you got to go there. And they don't inquire. So they're susceptible to the ebb and flow of social pressure. And I think if we can get parents not to feel that way, to look at this as a long-term sport, a high likelihood that they could get scholarship. It can help them go to college. It can develop their brain and their body in ways that no other sport can, and get the competition part out of their head, then they're going to have a better go. I'm sorry, Bryce, I didn't mean to
no, yeah,
cut you off.
I think that ties into what I was thinking as well. Going back to what Drew was saying about the ways that we spend our time. Everyone has a certain amount of time. We talk about that at practice a lot, that everyone in the state is practicing right now a couple hours after school every day. What you do during that time is important. Getting through a practice is not an accomplishment. It's how are you spending that time to become better at wrestling, and you can expand that over a career as well, especially earlier in the career. Is our time best spent traveling around the country competing at every tournament that calls itself a national tournament to post results, or is our time best spent getting better at wrestling, getting better at moving our bodies, and no one's getting college scholarships off of their results as a 7 and 8 year old. If we spend the limited amount of time we have in our career, especially early, getting better at wrestling, you'll probably win a lot when you get older if you're focused more on improvement of both your movement and your wrestling early rather than having to compete constantly. But going into the room and learning to move better is probably a better use of your time, especially early in the career.
And also understanding where you are in somebody's career. So today I had a practice with one athlete who wrestles D3, one athlete who is a good high school wrestler and upper weight, and then an athlete that's in high school and he's working to get better. So the D3 athlete, I understand what's going on in his, daily practices. I have a collaborative relationship with his coach. He is an incoming freshman. I've worked with him for 4 years, always at distance. And we got down today into the dirty about some things that were going on when he was competing and shooting, basically about leaning when he was shooting. And the heavyweight also has that same issue. It's not so much that he's leaning, but that he's got a super long torso. So the amount of distance he has to cover with his legs when he shoots is very long. So even if he tilts just a little bit, if his weight gets redistributed just a little bit out of the optimal situation, it has a dramatic effect on the result. So, we came back and we worked on all of these things. What is so interesting is for the last 2.5 years, the D3 coach has tried to get all of his athletes open-minded to body leveraging. And they haven't been, just a small subset. And so now they're 3 or 4 tournaments in and a couple of duels. And the athlete with the best record is the California boy, freshman, who has been body leveraging for a very long time. And he wants that individualized, he takes value. That hour and a half we wrestled today was so intense and so exponentially beneficial to all of his forward moving trajectory, torque, and wattage in shooting. And he embraced that. He wanted that. And that's what I needed to be doing with him. I do not need to be doing repetitive drilling with him for conditioning like they're doing in his D3 practice. I know what's going on. I did not have to call the coach and ask for permission. I did not have to call the assistant coaches. We know, we work together. It's a good deal. This other athlete, the one who's a multi-time state finalist, I was just in with his high school coach with him on a practice Wednesday morning at 5:30 a.m. And the high school coach is working with all the other high school athletes, and he is happily letting me take the time to work on what I work on with this athlete, because he knows it's a part of what that athlete needs to be successful for his team. And he's not threatened. He's an adult about it. He lets me do my thing. All the coaches are happy to see me. We take up disproportionate amount of greater space doing what we're working on. And he's happy and thrilled. And we need more of that. Yesterday, I coached at the Marine Corps Marymount University 10 local high schools together. They do a little, they do a bit with the Marines, and then they open up and they have these different quadrants of people coaching, and I have this quadrant. So I'm coaching, and afterwards they wrestle live. And it was interesting when I started coaching every time a coach would come to my group with whatever group was coming, it wasn't by high school, it was by weight, weight line. And they would come to me, and then the coach would stay. Even when the group went to the next one, and I ended up with the majority of the high school coaches standing right there with me, because what I was saying, I was not saying, if I was solely responsible for an athlete and I was working with them for weeks at a time, I would definitely direct what I felt was the best technique shot for them. But that's not what I'm in here. I've got 10 different high schools, and I need to give these kids information that's going to help them have hope and do better and stay in the sport. So I'm just concentrating on the sequential muscle order for any shot. And it captivated the other coaches. They just stood there and watched. And so by the end, everybody had to, I think we had 4 groups that circled. And here we're, so every time I would turn around, I would think I would have to ask another coach to come out and help me. But like, oh, you were here last time. Come here. Let's do this. But I know they were there because they caught immediately that this was going to be transferable to what their athletes do. And so I think there's just a real case to be made for having athletes always working to get better, staying, 80% focused on improving their wrestling. And that should and can start from a sequential muscle order, movement-based practice, and adding on the technique with it, and that will span their career, as opposed to teaching them a series of techniques that work in the moment, that make them the 5, 6, 12, 13-year-old champ but will not transfer into high school. They have it in their head that it's important that they win so people like them. And they're not being set up, not only not to succeed at wrestling, but really at anything else in life, because we're all, especially Bryce and I, are old enough to know that stuff changes.
Yeah,
You know?
wrestling's way different now than it was. But as
Well,
you were saying,
and everything else you do in life,
yeah,
it's
that's true.
got to be to change.
I think too, it's so important for that age range too, just simply based on the growing and size change. Like hitting, say, a fireman carry when your torso is 70% of what it's gonna be. It's gonna be so much different, when you grow and now you're, say, maybe taller than everyone you're wrestling or whatever. So trying to be based on just moves, single leg, high crotch, whatever this move, as you grow and stuff, it kind of goes out the window a lot of the time you'll see, especially, that's why like in the youth, a headlock is killer. It's because all of kids' weights are, in their head for most intents and purposes as a youth. But as you get bigger and filled out, that's just not going to work anymore. So
No.
everyone, I think, knows that intuitively. So I think now, especially with math-based movement just becoming a bigger part of the wrestling. Obviously, you've spearheaded it, but I mean, we've pointed out however many
Yeah.
times it's just global at this point, people moving in that way. Um, it's going to become more and more important that you start that at a young age so that, like you said, it can follow you throughout your whole career instead of trying to play catch up when the headlock all of a sudden stops working at 10, 11 years old.
Well, I was just in Kirkland, Washington, doing a private clinic, so meaning, not open to the public for a high school. And I was incredibly impressed with the mindset of the coach. And he's a Washington State Hall of Fame coach, and many accolades. Actually, Eric Yang was there with me for like 2/4 of the time, half the time, which is so special for me. But what he said to me was, and his text as follows: in my 40-year career, this is the most valuable information, and I am going to do everything that you taught right from the beginning with the athletes in my high school program, because immersion is just going slow to get this down is only going to make them, go faster. And I think more people are starting to get that, and they're starting to base how they feel about their coaching or feel the athletes feel about themselves based on improvement as opposed to overall placement, at a tournament. And I think we need a lot more of that. The other thing that I've noticed, I haven't looked at it officially, but I will. But I think I probably did over 40 to 50 clinics in the United States and other, and also when we were in Finland in Estonia last year. But I would say right now I'm currently trying to place maybe 30% of the people who had us with them in 2024 are were already getting on the books for 2025.
Yeah.
So for me, I think for around movement, that it needs to be, people want it cookie cutter. They want, well, I want to go to club practice 3 nights a week. I want you to be there, whether I'm there or not. And I want my kid to win at the next tournament. And I don't think that's viable. I think that for sequential muscle order or learning how to use your body correctly as you evolve through your career, that there has to be, whether it's online for a bit of time or whether you come to camps in the summer and then we touch base again, meeting in person for a day or two, 3 or 4, 5 times a year, and that there's video exchange. There's just so many ways to make it successful
Mhm.
that people are willing, especially people who were under 30 when COVID hit. People over 30, they wanted it to go back. I want them to go back. I don't want to have meetings online. I don't want to consider online learning. I want to go back. But people under 30, they now have their life filling in pieces of their life where they feel they have more in their life because they've learned to embrace alternative to what happened before COVID ways of learning and being taught and being effective. So, I see people catching on. Like this month, I'm only traveling. I'm doing 2 clinics. One, I'm going back to Renzo Gracie in New York, and I am going to St. Louis, went to the Saunders and Coach King out there. And then Captain America and I have been chatting today about coming to Brazil in the next couple of weeks. But I'm here. So now this next week, I'm going to be filming our new courses with Drew's coming in. But the week after, I have a family coming from Florida for 4 days for me to work with their 8-year-old. I have a family coming from Georgia for me to work with their son for 4 days. I have a jujitsu guy coming from Kentucky for me to work with him for 4 days. And I have another jujitsu person coming in for me to work with their athlete for 4 days. And in all of those cases, it'll probably be another month or two before I'm anywhere near them again. But they're going to be able to film, take examples, be able to modify, add on technique, and move forward. And then there's a whole group of athletes I started online, like Emerson Wickwire, who's probably 5'10" and is 11 years old and weighs 110 pounds. And now, because he practiced all those isometric holds from sequential muscle order, moving the muscles hold, I can now teach him technique online easily. And his dad is flabbergasted because he is not under 30. And he's thinking, we need to be in a room and there needs to be specific things taught. And now he's gone to a room. The coach there has respect for me. We know of it. We've competed against each other. I respect him immensely. He's an incredible coach. And when Emerson is doing something, they don't say to him, don't do that. If Coach Wester taught you that, let's just stick with that for that position. And if you don't have anything over here, let's do this. And then Em and I get back together online and I'm able to work with him. And then he comes, like 30 days later, we're in person for a couple of days and then off we go.
Mhm.
And it works. And I think that's where this sport is heading. And now I'm not just getting contacted by wrestling or jujitsu or striking, but now I'm going to be working with a lacrosse team in California in January, a football team, a D1 football program, some of their athletes in February. And other people are recognizing that this is possible. Today I cut video for an athlete, friend of mine, who is going to be a jockey in a horse race in England in the summer, and they were concerned about getting strong because they're not able to ride every day. And I cut 3 sets of video for them, showing them what muscle order they could do in their own workout facility in their home to help strengthen the muscles that are necessary to ride, a thoroughbred, which I do have a lot of knowledge of from
Yeah.
being rode a lot, a pretty good competitive rider.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds like almost an ideal situation because it seems to me like it's really easy to overcoach an athlete if you're with them every single day working on but giving them a bunch of things to work on, sending them away for a bit, having them practice, having them come back, you make tweaks to things and then add, and then have them go away, and whether that be virtually or in person, but those little coaching moments
That
there avoids the constant overbearing wanting to fix everything every time you.
Yes, that is so important. Drew will tell you that this is how, especially Angel Velasquez. I mean, this is how we did it before. Like I'll be very intense with the body leveraging for 2 or 3 practices. And then I just let them do it as fast as
Yeah.
they can. We play this wrestling prep Olympics, so they move fast and just make themselves do it. And parents will say to me, they're not doing this, they're not doing that. I'm like, you just have to let them do it for a little bit
Yeah.
and then come back and let them do it for a little bit and then come back.
Yeah.
It's not, if you're on them all the time, correcting everything all the time, it's not gonna, it's harder for them to be successful. I also think teaching athletes early on if they're in school or online schooling, and they're at an age where they are expected to retain the information and then be tested on it, some subset of days later, whether it's a quiz at the end of a chapter or a week, or it's a midterm or a final, that you should also start early, explaining to these athletes that they're expected to be able to verbalize, maybe not execute, but verbalize what they've been taught to do, that they should retain that information and it should be available them to source. So if a coach walks in and said, what are the three first most important components of your trail leg shot? What are the three most important components of your arm bar? Walk me through the first 7 points you're going to score in a match and describe the technique by the order in which you're using your muscle. I think as soon as you start expecting that, whenever it happens, that their body catches up with their brain, or their testosterone kicks in, or they're confident, whatever it is, then you're going to have a gigantic increase and they will go above. There's a big concept in wrestling, especially around nutrition, eating, but also in wrestling, that you work hard and then you get a break. So you work hard and you get your ability here, then you get a break, whether it's your weight, your quality of your nutrition, or using your body in any way goes down here. And then when you go back, you start over. The muscle memory might be there, but the cardio, 8 weeks of nachos with cheese, all that stuff is still in there. As opposed to you work hard, you compete, you eat well, and then you just modify a little thing. So we're going to have dessert 2 times a week, or I'm not going to be wrestling, but I'm going to hike 3 miles twice this week, and I'm going to go bowling, and I'm going to go to 2 yoga classes, and keep that standard here, not this up and back. And I think that, combined with what we're discussing today, is really going to change sports. And I think it's going to happen sooner than later.
I think too with that, like specifically kind of being more sequential muscle order specific, tying into what you were saying, it just puts agency into the kids.
Right.
I mean, I kind of noticed that in my own career, which I know I started pretty late with Carolyn comparative to the age range we're talking about today. I was more the 15, 16 range, going in my junior year of high school. But I hadn't done anything big in California. I made it to our section tournament in Southern section, which like for the area I was good,
Yeah,
ranked in the
right.
county, top three, top two, whatever. But obviously not on the state level compared to the Clovises, Buchanan's, Sacramento area, the really good wrestling areas. So for me, I came to camp and like I said, the muscle order just made sense to me in the sense of maybe I couldn't master all the movements like Carolyn said, but this is more efficient and makes more sense, particularly for me who maybe is behind my peers in the sense they just started earlier. And that's where the agency came into me. I didn't work with Carolyn up until the next summer.
Mhm.
I never came up for camp that year. I took from 1 week of camp all the body leveraging, took agency. I don't even remember if I wrote it down. I just remembered all of it. And I would go in at least twice a week. I luckily had a coach that would come open the room up for me and we'd put through workouts. And I said, hey, I really like what I learned at this camp, splitting when people shoot and trying to shoot back through them, all this stuff. And these are the techniques she taught or the training, body leveraging, basically, warm up. And I want to do it. And he said, go, yeah, let's do it. He even had his sixth, seventh grade kid join in with me, who had never been to camp, but at least try. And I think that's where like kind of what she was tagging on is you take the agency.
Right.
So I
Yeah.
just did it myself, did it as much as I could to the best of my ability. Wasn't perfect ever, but then that's the year I finally popped. I placed at state, did well, came back up for camp the next year, and that's when I was,
Hold it.
yeah, 4 weeks and really dove in there. And that's when, like you said, she started getting a little more specific.
Right.
But then from there, I was still never around her for more than I guess last year was the closest I've ever been. I lived like an hour and a half. And even then it was incremental improvements. You work on what you can in that time. And then when you go back, you kind of just pick up different things to execute better. And I think that kind of to summarize our whole discussion today, that's where the sport is more moving in this project management-esque
Right.
role with these different coaches is work on what you're working on, tailor it around a muscle order system or something that can be applied to all technique, and then you refine as you go. And like Carolyn said, you focus 80% on those muscle order movements, and then you have the 20 for maybe your coaching specific flair or what you like to teach, here and there. And then again, don't compete too much. Compete at set intervals where you can gauge, what the stuff you've been working on, what needs to stay, what needs to get thrown out, and what needs to get added.
Yeah, and that agency, the fact that you're responsible for your own success because of how you put that information into play as far as practicing it and getting better is what's going to keep kids in the sport long enough to be successful and to learn all of the lessons besides wrestling that we know our sport can teach, which is the ultimate goal. So yeah, that's awesome. Carolyn, was there anything else you wanted to talk about, mention things coming up? But I know we're getting pretty close to I guess
Well,
it's been about 40 minutes or so.
I think one of the things I wanted to just add on is that we have had a lot of historic experience with athletes who have different levels of interaction with us at Wrestling Prep or with me specifically, who are garnering now huge success. So, you take a Jesse Vasquez who spent, maybe almost 2 years living the majority of the time, close by me, and then, working together over the years. Or you take Max Wilner. Max, he would come up for camps and I would see him, and then he would work with Drew. And Drew was be working, and still today, just like 2 weeks ago, sent me some video of him competing for ASU, where he, wide legged for the win. And you have all these people. You have somebody like Massey Odiotti, who I met early on at a clinic I was doing for Jason Welch when he was a high school coach, like maybe 2014, whose dad would bring him to me in all capacities. We worked online, and then he becomes a national champ, and now he's at Northwestern. And then you take Will Dieter, I say Dieter, but I think it's Dieter. So I started working with in 2016 or 15, who would come to camp, has always lived far away with me, back and forth. I would go there and work with him. He would come down, and we'd work together every week online every single week. And he's now a 4-time Fargo All-American, 2-time champ. And we just have had so many people who would say that. I feel that there are lots of athletes who would say that. And it's kind of interesting. People will reach out to me now and go, did you work with so-and-so, or did you work with so-and-so? Because I saw this or I saw this. Or people sometimes when Amit Elor is doing a camp, one of the pictures that she often uses is of her in her stance, and it is the L-level stance that she starts in. I don't think she does everything, stays in that stance the whole time. And just so to keep everyone happy in America, I'm not responsible for her success. I worked with her between 7 to 14 and with a lot of other people. In fact, I just got a message from her mom. Her sister just delivered her baby a few hours ago. But you see it over and over and over. And this is sort of what we've done from the beginning. And I go places and people will all go to a college tournament, and people will just come up and talk to me, all these athletes. How do you know them? How do you know them? Oh, I worked with them here. I worked with them there. Or a college coach will say, I mentioned your name, and 8 athletes raised their hand and said they'd worked with you at some time. How do you do so much? And I said, well, I am not trying to compete with their coaches. I'm trying to add on wrestling prep, add on, and I don't care who anybody works with. I just want them to be better.
Yeah, yeah.
And I just think this is going to become, before it was blurry, and now I think it's going to become evident.
Yeah.
Evident.
All right.
Do you
Well,
have
thank
anything
you
else you
both
want to say,
for
Drew?
yeah,
No,
yeah.
I
Oh,
agree. I just think
okay.
it's going to become the norm. And that's the way the sport's trending. And you either adapt or you die, really, at the end of the day. And so if you want to be successful, you're going to have to kind of adapt to this new world, especially at these younger ages. Um, if you want to see, that kind of success, if your goal is to be a national champion, Olympic teams, Olympic medals, things like that. If that's where your dreams are, then yeah, you're gonna have to start adapting younger and younger. Because if you look at other countries, you look at Japan, for example. Not that I know their training system or anything, but they're seeing absurd success at extremely young ages. I mean, their Olympic champ in 2021 was like 22, and then they have this Ono kid who just beat everyone in the world, and he's like 19, so it's these kids are making big jumps with their systems around the world. And I'm sure if you could speak Japanese and could ingrain in their culture, they're probably following some sort of similar system.
All right, yeah, thank you both for hanging out, sharing all of your insights. Check out wrestlingprep.com. You can see Carolyn's travel schedule in the new year. She mentioned lots of repeat clinics there. We have
It,
oh yeah.
you go ahead. You're going to say we're expected to be able to people to start signing up for summer 2025
Oh,
in
okay.
December. We're just waiting for the venue to confirm, but we have our dates.
All right.
They have one meeting in the middle of December, and then then the curtains up. But people can see it now at
Okay.
wrestlingprep.com.
All right. Yeah, sign up, take a look at summer camp information there as well. She's got the body leveraging course available, and I know Carolyn and Drew are going to record some new stuff coming up soon, so look for that on the website soon as well. But well, we'll see you guys soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.